Folks, hello. Welcome to Talking Crit. We've got a good show ahead of here for you. I am Eric Tenkar, your bartender in the OSR. Today, one of the people holding us up is my once a week work spouse, Bad Mike Battalato. Adjacent to Mike, not holding us up. Jim doesn't hold us up. Usually it's Mike. But no, uh, Jim Kitchen. And next to me, our special guest tonight, the one and only Bill Webb, best known for Frog Games, Necromancer Games, dozens, if not hundreds, of products in the old school and Pathfinder realms, even 5e, dare I say. So,
I think our SKU counts up to about 840 or something now.
Oh my God! All right, I had literally no idea, and I wouldn't have guessed that much. But God,
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Now, Bill, you have a new Kickstarter.
I do. And if we want to start with that, we can. I mean, I can tell whatever stories and lies you want me to tell, but I guess the way I always do sort of an elevator pitch is
we love the elevator pitch. Jim is a fan of the elevator pitch.
So here's the elevator pitch, man, which is I've for the last 45 plus years, in the early days, we had white box D&D, or in my case, white box. I wasn't around for brown box yet, but I was still too young. But my first D&D set was white box rules. And at the time, almost nothing existed. There was no monster manual. There was no player's handbook. There was some obscure publications that came out, like Arduin. The very first box set was already out. Chaosium and Flying Buffalo had a few things out. And most inspirational to me was Warlock from Balboa Games. And the reason it was most inspirational to me was that my original DM, my very first DM that I played with, was a guy named Buck, and one of the other players in the game was a guy named Steve, and his name was actually Steve Peterson, no relation to Cthulhu's, no relation to Chaosium or anything, but they owned Balboa Games. They were both the MIT students who were the Caltech Gamer Society, who were the guys that founded Balboa Games. And they had that Warlock book. And then, of course, they got a cease and desist and a lawsuit notice from WotC, and they shut down and quit making those after 3 books. But so the elevator pitch is basically this. I think that I've created a white box game that has enough rules that fill in the blanks, that it makes it readily playable by new and old players. It's absolutely, I've never seen another set of rules, and some of you see me play at conventions or other things, where it's a white box game that's not murder hobo focused. You don't want to fight things. You want to get treasure and accomplish objectives, and maybe even make friends with the kobold tribe, or make friends with the pack of wolves, or certainly not fight them. Because when you're a white box character and you've got 3 hit points, the odds of you getting killed in a combat are pretty high. One of the things that I learned very early on, running games in the late 70s and early 80s, was I kept having TPKs because, all you did was roam around hexes and fight stuff, right? You cruise around the Wilderlands and you run into a werewolf, or 5 or 8 of them or whatever it was, and they wipe your party out. And so the next time we play, we're throwing up new characters. And so there are 3 things that are a little different about the way I've played, and about the way the rules for this game are written, that are really, I think, intentionally different, and also are cross applicable to almost any, certainly OSR game, and maybe others. The first one is what I call lore checks. And back in the day, there was no such thing as a skill or a feat or anything like that. What it would be is like, I want to climb that vine up to the top of that 60-foot tree, because there were no thieves either, keep in mind. And so I'd be like, all right, roll a d6. And what's your strength? Okay, it's 15. Okay, subtract 1 from that d6 and low is good. Or the paladin would be like, what ancient evil cult symbol is that? And you'd be like, well, you might know that. Roll a d6. And so I created a d6 mechanic that I've now actually written up, and then was made clear by my editing team of Jeff and Edwin. So I think it's understandable by people besides me now, that kind of handles that aspect of the game. So that's sort of one thing that is a little new and different. The second thing is I've developed really extensive parlay rules. And that's where I was talking about making friends with the wolves, or at least getting them not to eat you, or making friends with the kobolds, and so that you can trade your metal weapons for bags of scorpions, which my group recently did. Hi, Ty. And that there's some rules for that. And then the third thing really is morale rules for not player characters, where, do the 3 remaining kobolds, actually this happened about an hour ago in our game, really want to stick around and fight, or are they going to split when Kim's character takes one out with a sling stone at long range? And so those types of more ROLE playing aspects that I've applied to this game really do make it different than most white box games. It's not as random. There's lots of stuff that, it depends on what the players do. Most importantly, all of those things, though, is still in this game, everything in the game can be resolved with a maximum of 2 dice rolls. And that was also intentional. You guys, and I know, Mike, you've certainly seen me do this, and Eric, you've been in my games before.
Yeah.
I run games for 15, 20 or more people. Actually, my regular home group's got 16 in it, and my online group's got 12. And a combat round doesn't take more than, a couple of minutes, right? Even with 20 people, I can get a combat round done in about 2 or 3 minutes. And that's what allows me to run really large games, and I think would allow almost anyone to run large games, because I've tried to create it where you don't roll that many dice.
Right.
You say, I'm going to do this, and the DM says, gosh, that makes sense, and you have a chance of success or failure, and you go with it. And there's a large section of how to do that in the Game Master's Guide that we've written. And so the synopsis would be really simple rules. It's fast, it's furious, it goes really quick. There's not a lot of rules lawyering or anything else. The second thing is I've provided a lot more ROLE playing into what has typically been an ROLL playing style of game. And the last one is, really, those are the 2 biggest things. And I've made it compatible, except for the specific rules related to combat mechanics and related to character generation, that thing. I've made it compatible with certainly any OSR game. So if you play Swords and Wizardry, or you play Shadow Dark, or you play other stuff, there's still a lot of material in here that you can use and cross apply to your game. I did that intentionally because who wants to compete with Kelsey?
Mm-hmm.
God bless.
Well, one of the things I think is interesting is you mentioned 2 of the things that are probably overlooked a lot, especially with old school groups, and that's parlay and morale. And I've found myself in the last few years, I use them a lot more than I used to, because they do add a really good element to the game. And I don't think why do most groups just don't use that? That seems like that's just something when I'm playing games, nobody's ever considering parlaying with the orcs, when really, unless you're in a combat situation, like if you're going into an orc stronghold, yes, they're probably not going to parlay. But if you just run into them in the wilderness, that's not a bad option. So why isn't that used more?
Yeah. What really inspired that, Mike, was do you remember the supplement that came out in I think it was 79? It was called Monsters.
Yeah, was that Tunnels and Trolls? No, it wasn't.
Tunnels and Trolls.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah, it was.
Okay. We played that for about 6 months, and what it is you play the monsters, and then these evil player characters run by the DM are come into your home and try and kill you and steal your stuff. And it really put a perspective with me. And I think those of you who've read my work, particularly like Rapanathok, you'll see that there's a lot of that inspiration in there where, the goblins don't want to die either. And so, what motivation would they have to not kill you? Well, are you trying to invade their home and steal their stuff? You're absolutely right with what you said. They're probably not going to be real willing to talk. But if you run into them in the woods and you're both out hunting deer, they don't want to fight any more than you do, because they could get killed, because they've got D6 -1 hit points too. And so that specific game inspired me, 40 years ago or whatever, to focus a lot more on not combat in my games.
Interesting.
So Bill, let's bring the project up on screen because I'd sort of like you to talk to some of this. This is a Necromancer Games project. This isn't a Frog God project.
Correct.
Talk about the difference in that, and is this some more artistic license for you to do something a little sort of off the beaten path, or something a little off mainstream? What's the definition there?
So, Jim, we have a really bright line in our product lines. And what that is everything that's associated with, well, strangely, they're both associated with my stuff, but everything that's associated with the Lost Lands world setting, which is typically our larger adventures, or it's anything that's Lost Lands oriented, the gods of the Lost Lands, that most of the adventures that are set in the Lost Lands is a Frog God product.
Right.
Okay. Everything that's more generic or not necessarily associated with our campaign setting, which has 300 adventures or something that are tied to it, right? Everything that's not associated with the campaign setting, so our source books, stuff like the Tome of Artifacts or the Tome of Horrors or the Tome of Alchemy, or a rule set like the Necromancer's Game, those are Necromancer products. And we kind of segregated those so that we could focus all of our energy for Lost Lands projects in Frog God and not Lost Lands projects in Necromancer.
Got it.
So yes, you're going to see more wingding stuff in Necromancer. The really weird stuff is going to be Necromancer. The generic stuff is going to be Necromancer. And anything rules oriented, whether it's monsters or a complete rule set, is going to be Necromancer. If I write Rapanathuk next, which actually we have one of those in the hopper right now, I think it's written. The kind of the last piece of Rapanathuk, which is the Underdark area and stuff like that, that'll be a Frog God project. Because Rapanathuk is set in the Lost Lands.
Okay, so now it looks like we have some medieval knights tackling a Cthulhu-like monster.
Yep. That's called a tentacle dragon. Actually, it's called the Dragon of Many Eyes, I believe.
Our Japanese aficionados are already excited. So
let me talk a little bit about that. And by the way, I have at the request of Derek Amode, who's one of my Patreon clients, as well as a longtime customer of Frog God and Necromancer, dating back 25 years. He said, you got to stat these things. So about 8 years ago or 9 years ago, our main cartographer, who's Robert Altbauer, started drawing all this Bayou Tapestry / Monty Python / Cthulhu art. And I started seeing it on his feed, and I'm like, dude, I want to buy all of your art that looks like that from you. And he's like, sure. And I go, I don't even know I haven't even seen it all yet, but I want all of it. And so about then, and he gave me a deal, and I bought the right. I don't own the art, but I own the rights to use the art for D&D. And so about 8 years ago, I bought all this stuff, and I've been waiting for the right project to use it for. And this totally fit the bill for me. It was like, because I love it. And I think there's like 24 or 25 of these pieces of artwork that he drew. And I fell in love with them. And so it's like, it made sense for me to use them for my rule set. And then a few days ago, like I said, one of our longtime customers and one of my patrons asked me, are you going to stat that stuff up? And actually last night I sent, I think there's 8 of them that I statted up and created new monsters for. And those will be coming out as a free download or as a stretch goal or something on the Kickstarter. I don't know which yet, because that's sort of up to Jen. But I statted those guys up and then paired them with some of the artwork, and they're tentacly, creepy Cthulhu D&D monsters, right? Basically, a mind flayer by another name. But I love the artwork so much. That's the reason I decided to use it for this particular project. I've been sitting on it waiting for the right thing.
I'm always interested to see. Now, there's 3 books in this, right? Is it going to be a box set? Or
there'll be 3 hardcover books in a box, and then there'll also be a soft cover book in the box, and then there'll be a poster in the box. And so the poster is, and I'll get to the poster actually last. So there's a player's handbook. There's a monster manual, which I think we call something else, like a Tome of Monsters or something. And then there's a game master's guide, because I can't call it a dungeon master's guide. So the completely 100% rules specific book is the player's handbook, and that has all the combat mechanics, all the rules mechanics, the lore mechanics, the parlay mechanics, and all of the stuff associated with player characters and the gameplay in terms of purely ROLL playing, so the dice rolling portion of it. And then the monsters, well, they're monsters, and there's a lot of them. I think I put 240 or something in here. And then the Game Master's Guide consists of a lot of specific GM type advice, like what's a hex crawl, how do you run it, what are some tips on running it, what's a dungeon crawl, how do you run it long term, what are some tips on running it, and then there's other stuff in there like that. That's sort of rules advice from 45 years of doing this, and how to apply different pieces of the rules in those. Last but not least, there's massive treasure tables, and I've created new treasures, including what I call mundane magic items. It's the old thing about the blanket of comfort that lets you restore 2 hit points per night instead of 1, or the oxless plow that lets you till a field, which is really nice if you're Hercules without an ox, and just little wonky stuff like that. Plus, of course, real magic items. But you figure in any fantasy world, the farmers would be a huge market for something that they needed a water can that never ran out of water or something, right? And some of those things actually really come into play. My home group's got one that's I didn't call it a Febreze candle, but basically it was a Febreze candle, and it's pretty useless because it's used for like outhouses and stuff, but it also stops the stench from troglodytes and ghasts. So the really extensive treasure tables, and that detail out not only magic items, but detail out, you might find livestock or equipment or trade goods or gems and jewelry and stuff like that. And I've done sort of examples of all of those things in those tables as kind of a follow-on to each table. Scrolls and potions, that kind of thing. And then what I'm most proud of really in that book, and this is probably about half of the book, is the encounters, is how you do encounters. And it's got all the rules for encounters, like how many feet they start away if you're surprised and not surprised, and all the typical stuff you usually do. But then I have a series of about 40 pages of encounter tables, which also appear on a poster in a slightly different form so that it fit on a poster, that were 1D1000 tables that my kids and I sat down for about 3 days last summer, took all the monsters in the monster manual, added a whole bunch of non-monster encounters, which I'll talk about in a second, and then ranked everything by rarity by biome. And so if you're in the plains, you're not going to encounter a red dragon. You'll probably encounter a blue dragon or whatever, right? If you're in the high mountains, you're probably not going to encounter a black dragon, but if you're in a swamp, you will. Stuff like that. A sphinx is going to be in a desert, and then we ranked them all by rarity and by what biome they to go in. And we tried to do between 500 and 700 of those 1,000 numbers as what we call monsters. It's monsters and men, things like that. So the remaining piece of the table is stuff like you find ancient ruins, and then you go back to a subtable and you roll again. You find caves, you go back to a subtable and you roll again. You find island in the ocean, or you find a oasis in the desert, or you find something like that, and you trip across a trap that somebody left there to catch a bear. And then I provide examples, about 20, I think, of each of those as examples of things you can use for the non-monster encounters. I don't think anybody besides me has ever done a bigger encounter table. The one I did for Mother of All encounter tables back in 2003 or whatever.
I mean, Bill, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't know if you realize it or not, but when you say nobody else has got a bigger encounter table, I'm not sure that's as sexy as you perhaps think it is.
Fair enough.
Let me from an actuarial standpoint, I'm sure there's a lot of people in our audience that are panting right now. But,
let me rephrase that. It's not as big as the 240-page book that I made back in 2002 that was nothing but encounter tables.
So the real question that comes to mind, right, is I feel like you need to put a warning label on this, which is, this is not your mother's 5th edition with baby bumpers.
That's absolutely.
Clearly, you're going after a demographic, which is, oh, by the way, you can't just slog your way through this. Good luck with that.
Right. Yeah. It's still a white box game, right?
Right.
And that's, and if you, I think that I think I've said this several places in the Kickstarter text, and I definitely do in the books, but if you just try to treat it like a video game, I don't say it exactly like this. If you try to treat an OSR game like a video game, and you're going to go clear every level, and you're going to assume you can just defeat every monster, you're going to be really sorry.
If you wish to juggle the chainsaws, nobody's going to stop you.
Nobody's going to stop you.
You take the blades off.
That's Jim. That is words of wisdom, man.
But there's always those determined folks. Eric, let's go over to the rewards, because I want to talk about something interesting in the rewards. Now, you've got a lot of people who are backing the Player's Handbook, just the Player's Handbook by itself. Yeah. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to scroll down and let's talk about this. I really like something that you did here. So there's just a hardcover copy of the Player's Handbook. Then the majority of your backers have selected the box set. So keep scrolling, Eric. You'll see that.
Trying to.
That's okay. Toward the middle. That's right. Keep going. Okay, keep going. Next one. There you go. So you've got a lot of backers that are backing the either the box set or the all-in, right?
Yeah, I think almost everybody's bought the all-in.
Yeah, you've got 145, I think. If you scroll down a little bit more, you'll see that there's like 145 people that have backed the all-in, or I'm sorry, 134. Yeah. But what I really like the next level that you have, and that is, let's get a table going, right? Let's get everybody playing at the table, because what I really liked about this, just a smidge more, Eric, is that you'll see that you get too far, go back up.
Not enough, too far. A little more.
Keep going. Because you get 4 copies of the Player's Handbook, which lets everybody come to the table, right? And I think a lot of people don't understand the appeal. Yeah. I just don't think. I think that's a very smart piece of let's get everybody onto this at once.
Hang on. Well, there we go. Okay, I'm back. The door got knocked open by the dog, so it was noisy because they're cooking dinner. I agree. I think it's a great way to get a table going.
Yes,
and it's also a basically a buy 3 get 1 free for the extra Player's Handbooks, which was intentional.
Sure. Now I'll just throw this out. Box sets make things more complicated, and box sets add a layer of complication and a layer of expense in the printing process. Are you sketching out? I don't know if you were printing in Asia or not, but are you sketching out alternatives for printing somewhere else? Are you going to see an interruption in your supply chain? What's your lay of the land right now?
I can 100% address that, and it is costing us a lot of money.
Sure.
So yes, we printed our color products in Asia, and we have historically printed our black and white products in the U.S. and in a printer in Missouri. I think some of you see me do the stupid party tricks where I'll take a 1,000-page book and shake it by its cover and it doesn't fall apart.
Right.
Okay, those were printed in the U.S. by the printer that we're going to be using. So when all this nonsense has started and the prices all got wonky and we're not really sure whether tariffs apply or how much of the tariff applies or which tariffs apply or anything else, and I'll address that a little later about the tariffs thing. But and also supply chain is the thing that scared me the most.
Yeah.
And so we made a really conscious decision. And I did have to up the price by a little bit. The box set was going to be $100, and it was going to have dice. And so we're no longer having dice because those are definitely from overseas. And I had to up the price by about $10 because when we priced the printing for color books in the US, it was almost twice as expensive. That being said, yes, the US printer is doing the boxes as well as the Zaptron. And actually I'll get to that in a second too, because the boxes were painful. So the actual printing itself was only about 30% more. The box cost was like 9 times what the printing in Chinese cost was. But if I send a box set out, and it's a box set and the customs agent looks at it, my gut feel is they're not going to call it literature. And if they don't call it literature, there's a 245% tariff on it right now.
Right.
And so we are using a U.S. printer that I've used before, many, many books. They've done probably 100 books for me before. The same printer that Steve Chanel uses.
Yep.
And so I know the quality will be there. I got no questions about that. They also made a specific decision to only use U.S. made paper rather than get paper from Canada or from China, which they used to, and most people do. And so I think we have, it's not a 0% chance of a supply chain issue, but it's as close as I can get it to 0.
And so will your printer do the collation for you as well, or is that something you handle?
Yeah. I could probably handle it, but honestly, Jillian and I would probably screw it up at least 50 times. So the printer's doing all the collation. We're paying them to do that. Like I said, the print cost doubled all in. And that was part of it is that, the bids from China were really good, man. I mean, I they were really good prices. I could have actually paid the author with where we're at right now. And Fugly, I'll try and address that one in a second as well. But I didn't want to take any chances that, I don't like to play with other people's money. And until the book or the box set in this case shows up in your mailbox, this is other people's money.
Yep.
And so I wasn't going to take any risks that we couldn't deliver the product as promised. And with meaning a nice quality product that's got stitch bound books and a sexy color poster of the encounter tables and all that other stuff. I wasn't going to take any risk that something that I had no control over would screw that up. And so Zach and I had a long conversation, and actually Jen as well was really involved in this, about do we basically knock our profit to half what it would have been? And the answer is yes. And the true break even from printing on this thing was actually less than the funding goal, or it's more than the funding goal. I mean, it's probably including the supplemental pack. It's probably about $29,000 or $30,000. And so right now we've got that paid for. Like I said, we've got that paid for. We have the editing paid for, and we have the layout paid for. And I'm hoping we make enough money to pay the author. I'm not sure if we will or not, but I'd really like to see that happen.
That author guy makes too much money anyway.
Yeah, right. I think I made about $8,000 last year, Mike. So to answer Fugly's question, what does it take to call it literature? It takes a conscious decision by the customs agent, and it's 100% at his discretion. So we had a Kickstarter that's still outstanding. That was a month ago, sitting on the docks in Shanghai waiting to be shipped to us. And I put the coaster brakes on it. We had not paid the full printer bill yet, but I called the guy who reps the Chinese company, and I said, "Hey, dude, I'm not going to pay you for this because if it's force majeure." And I actually consulted our lovely lawyer Ty Beard about that. Okay. And it's a force majeure event because it's not a tariff. It's a trade war, and they agreed it was a trade war. And what they have offered to do is go at risk. On this one book, and by the way, I have a plan B if this doesn't happen. They're going to go at risk. If it shows up here and the tariff is a reasonable cost, they're going to pay it. If the tariff is like 3 times the printing cost or double the printing cost or whatever, we're just going to let the books, go to the garbage, and I'll figure out a different answer for our customers. But I will deliver it. I've already posted on our Kickstarter. It was the Tome of Essential Horrors, I think. I posted on the Kickstarter that, look, I think I may have a solution. If I fail, you're going to get a book. Sorry, guys, it might be a POD book, and those of you with limited editions are probably getting partial refund. But we've delivered about 60 Kickstarters, and I'm not going to screw that up now. Ty says Justice, yes, it can, Ty, because I own you. I own your soul.
So Bill, going forward, I don't know what the future holds with this. Going forward, how are we how's Frog God going to look at future projects?
Well, we're gonna
really know.
I'm gonna take a page right out of Steve Chenault's book, man, until I have certainty that. And by the way, huge kudos to our overseas printer partner for being that way about it. They were awesome, and I would love to give them more business. That being said, unless I'm certain that it's safe and we're not going to get jacked for, 2 or 3 times the printing cost, I don't think we can afford to take the risk to print out of the U.S. I prefer to print in the U.S. anyway. The reason we haven't done that in a lot of our books in the past is just because I'd rather charge my customers $40 than $60 for a book.
I'll jump in and give you a save here, right?
Yeah.
Let me just say this real quick. We've spent weeks talking about this. Months ago is when I first brought up on this show about what Steve Chenault. Steve Chenault took a look at things and created his own in-business printing company.
Yep.
And And so I think you, like everybody else who publishes RPGs, were certainly lured by pricing overseas, and it worked very, very well for quite a while.
Yep.
And there was risk of some kind that has now manifested itself in a way that I think a lot of people never imagined. I've heard carve-outs for the U.S. and Canada for bringing things in, and i.e. component assembly in either Canada or Mexico, and then bringing them in under the terms that there are for those countries. But for an RPG project, I think it's a case of maybe this will get some of the American printers to be a little more competitive and a little more, I'll say, aggressive about trying to land business. I mean, they're going to have business coming to them that they didn't expect. But I think competition is going to drive some of the initial cost. I think we're probably 12 months, 18 months from it coming down to a more level field.
Yeah.
But right now in the moment, I think a lot of companies are just like you. They're just trying to find domestic solutions and find a way to get their projects to life.
Yeah. And it's all cost risk balance, right, Jim?
That's right.
One of those things where
That's right.
If I had to charge you $60 for a 250-page hardcover book, or I could charge you $40 for it, more people are going to buy it at $40, right? And so part of our conscious decision was sell more books, not necessarily make any more money, but it's really sell more books. Because most people don't know, but print cost, historically needs to be between 20 and 25% as a maximum of your total retail sale price, because you're selling stuff to wholesalers at 42 cents on the dollar.
Right. We've talked this math extensively.
Yes, you guys figured it out. I mean, I think, and so, at this point, if the printing costs more than that, it gets a little scary. Don't
correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but you're not going any products through distribution at this point, are you?
A little bit. So we do some. I mean, obviously, Noble Knight stocks everything we own, and they're our biggest customer lifetime from that. They sight unseen, they take a large quantity of everything we produce.
Sure.
And then Alliance, not Alliance. Well, Alliance Diamond is gone, right? I think you guys are going to talk about that later. But,
we'll be talking about that.
Yeah. ACD does buy our stuff, and they stock some titles. They pretty much always stock our monster books. They always stock our tomes of X, whether that's alchemy or treasures or whatever. They stock all of our generic stuff and some of our 5e stuff. And I think they used to stock Bunnies and Burrows when it was still in print as a hardcover. But by and large, their orders have gotten much, much smaller than they used to be. And that's from conversations I've had with a bunch of other people, and with other companies in our industry. That's not just us having much, much smaller orders. ACD in general is stocking smaller quantities in-house than they used to. And I guess that's because less people are buying stuff at game stores. I don't really know.
I think it's a mix. ACD. The last time I got a tour of an ACD warehouse, their inventory levels were what I will simply call aggressive.
Yeah.
And I imagine that an accountant walked through and did an inventory and said, if you don't carve 30% of this down, we're going to have problems. Right. I think most of the distribution houses typically will do that. I find there's only been a couple of manufacturers that have been willing to do floor deals with inventory where you bill out what you sell, and we do periodic inventories to make sure your numbers are correct. But that's very few companies that are willing to do that, and they have to be really trusted partners.
Yeah.
It's very uncommon in the RPG industry for anybody being willing to do that.
I mean, I would certainly trust Noble Knight to do that, but that's not the way they do it. They sort of have a special deal for me anyway.
Sure.
They pay better than the other distributors do, but they also get stuff the other distributor that doesn't go on sale, right?
Right.
So they wanted the Ra Hotep's Tomb Dungeon Master screen. That's actually not a distribution item, but Noble Knight got plenty, right?
So when you look at the next, we'll say 6 months, because all of this trade stuff is going to be resolved within 2 quarters at the most.
One way or the other. Yeah.
That's right. And when this is all, when you look at the next 6 months to a year, what are your sort of thoughts about next projects that you have on deck, either as Frog God or Necromancer,
Sure.
What is it you're drawn to bring to market? What is it?
Well, we have the Tome of Artifacts, which is the next in the Tome series, and that it's coming up soon, and that is definitely going to get printed in the U.S. But that also, if that one went totally haywire, it's not that expensive a product to produce or sell, right? It's a 200-page single hardcover book, and maybe a limited edition if we can afford to do one where people will buy it, right? So leather cover or whatever, because we've historically done leather covers of all of those. Real leather too. I'm not sure how many people do real leather, but we do. So that book doesn't really scare me. Where I start to get scared is in the Rapanathuk Underdark book, right? Because it's freaking big, and it's it's another 600 pagers. It's going to be really expensive to make. The investment level is really high. Jim, I think we're printing it in the U.S. unless I am 95% confident that it's safe. I don't see how we cannot. First of all, my preference is always, buy local, buy U.S., or certainly buy U.S., Canada, Mexico, right?
Sure. I think North America sums it up quite well.
Yeah, and I would prefer to have my money in North America. The idea of, we're probably entering a recession. I want to provide jobs and revenue in the United States and tax money in the United States, right? Or certainly with their closest allies. I'm scared to play the game where, a year and a half from now, something else bad happens. That's, again, force majeure beyond my control. And I've either got to, screw my customers over or go bankrupt making it right, or whatever that is. I mean, what the margin of this business.
Oh yeah. I'm more interested to know sort of like, you're not going to take the Chenault route of creating an in-game or an in-company publisher.
No.
Right? That's
That
off the
being
table.
said, there's a I'd say there's a 99% probability that we're going to start printing a lot of books with Steve.
Because Steve's expanding.
Do you know my history with Steve at all?
No. So we've talked about how Steve's expanding, and I think that Steve has leveraged. I think Steve took a look at things 10 years ago and has begun this wonderful path where he's probably going to end up being the RPG printer of choice for a lot of companies, simply because he recognizes an opportunity and he could keep people employed for 2,000 hours a year doing nothing but printing stuff for other companies.
Well, two things. One is he used to do all of my soft cover printing.
Right.
When he had print shop, many years ago, 15 years ago, he was our sole source for all of our soft cover books, but all he could do was black and white.
Right.
And so that shifted when Steve couldn't do color and the market demanded color. Right.
Yep.
And then Steve's printing press broke and a guy quit and he was sort of stuck and he didn't have his print guy anymore. Steve's my closest friend in the industry. We go back to, we're two of the surviving initial companies from the very first wave of 3.0 publishers, right? We met in Vegas in 2000. And we're tight friends. We collaborate a lot. I wrote an adventure for his last Kickstarter. If we hit the stretch goal on this one, he's writing one for mine. I've written multiple articles and multiple pieces for his books before. No money ever changes hands. And I mean, obviously when he printed for me, I paid him. But he's been a partner in many business ventures where we've shared profit. He's a super easy dude to work with, and I love the man.
Yes. I've said it before. He's one of the most decent people to come into this industry in the last 25 years.
He's a really good dude. He's a really good dude.
And we need more Steve Chenaults.
I wholeheartly agree. We need if we can get more Steve Chenaults and Kelsey Dion's, then the world's a better place.
Yes.
Jim, I wanted to bust in just a second. I wanted to. This is scintillating conversation talking about tariffs and printing, but I wanted to get to the nuts and bolts of the game a little bit.
All right, let's do that.
Because I've read some of it, read a little bit of it, and I like to say I really like, and I don't know if this is considered a big feature of it. The hex crawl portion is really interesting because White Box was a hex crawl game, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I mean, so this is going back to the good job of making it very easy to run a hex crawl, because a lot of people have problems with that. I see that all the time in forums. People have a problem like, I just don't know how to run a hex crawl. I don't know what to do. Explain a little bit about your hex crawl.
Okay, so part of it is obviously terrain has effects on things, and that can be resolved with 2 dice rolls. So you enter a mountain hex, and you roll to see if there's an encounter, and then you roll the encounter, and then it's very clear what the movement rate of various things are in the mountain hex. And then from that mountain hex, you move someplace else. By the way, some of the things on the encounter tables include like physical hazards and bad things that happen to you, like avalanches, right? And then you move down into the hills. Well, there's a dice roll for an encounter check, and then there's a dice roll for an encounter. And so how, Mike, do you want the quick explanation, or do you want the half an hour one? Because what I've tried to do is What I've tried to do,
a 19-minute one.
What I've tried to do is distill it so that it's easy to do, whether it's a hex crawl, a dungeon crawl, whatever the focus of the campaign wants to be. Different classes like rangers and things like that give you some advantages in the wilderness, for example, and that's written into the individual character classes. Different classes, like thieves or whatever, may give you an advantage in a dungeon crawl because that's sort of what they do. And then there's city-based adventures. I have a dissertation that I've written on that is not necessarily specific to the game itself, but specific to running a campaign-based game. And that's something maybe that Jim in the earlier discussion with the elevator speech that I didn't say is that this game and the way the game design is done is one. I've run the same campaign for 45 years. It's designed specifically to run long-term campaign games. You can run it as a one-shot, but it's not. The focus of this game is not a one-shot. The focus of this game is a long-term campaign game. I mean, hell, even my convention games, people have had characters for 10 or 12 years, right? I think actually Jillian's had hers for 15 years with that. And so is Alberta Chulik and Ian McGarty had their characters for nearly 15 years, running games with us only at conventions. So the game itself is designed to be a long-term play campaign where you're kind of forced to retire or build a castle or a temple or something at level 10, because OD&D games get really stupid once you can fight 6 Balrogs.
So Jim, you remember? I mean, Jim, Bill, you remember Austin Jim's game he used to run in North Texas, right?
Every session I was available for.
It's amazing. So this guy had a gigantic board built, and he ran white box D&D hex crawl, and you started on the shore and you worked your way in, and everything. It was you went from A to B. Everything you rolled until you came to an encounter, or
with him until
became a parlay, or
with him he started it.
So how much of that? I mean, was that something that kind of inspired you a little bit too?
I learned how to play using outdoor survival as my world map, right? And so, because we immediately went out and bought outdoor survival as soon as we bought the white box, because it said we had to. So I got my D&D box set at Nordstrom's when I was 12 years old, and then got dice, which were impossible to find. And then the next thing I got for Christmas, my birthday's in November. The next thing I got for Christmas was a box of outdoor survival, because it said I needed it. And it cost like $20, man, which was, in 1978, that was a lot of goddamn money. And so I had to wait till Christmas to get that, because, we weren't getting out of the $3 a week allowance. And then the other thing I got was Empire, the same Christmas, with Empire of the Petal Throne box set, which was kind of neat. But yeah, I mean, that watching Jim run his games, I have some of the rules that he would consider to be canonical and insist on having as alternate rules, like starving to death and running out of water. So I put that in the book as an alternate, alternative. You can use it or not, because honestly, most gamers these days, I think I know about 10 of them who track food. And I don't know how many gamers I know, but that number's somewhere. It's definitely a 4-figure number, right? And so most people don't really want to do that. I've tried doing it, and all it does is bog things down for me, because I'm just not. It's not a focus of what I do. I'm a storyteller.
there's only so much realism you can put in the game before you're not playing a fantasy
That being said, some
role-playing
people,
game anymore. Yeah,
and if you're running a hex crawl game, that can become a really important feature of the game like that. You might want to do that. I'm not insisting that my players do, but I put rules in for it in case somebody does want to do that. And I've done it before. Like I said, I just found that for my style of DMing, it's not a real good fit for me. But there's enough white box players and enough hex crawl players, I think, out there that would expect that to be in it. So I did do a section on it as an alternate rule. Hey, Bob. And so, but yeah, Jim definitely inspired me a little bit. He inspired me to start writing all this stuff up again about 12 or 13 years ago. And then, of course, we never published it because we had Swords and Wizardry. So why were we going to publish a competing system? But my games are very different than Matt's. I think they are also very similar. Obviously, we ran a co-campaign game for 12 years or something, so they can't be too dissimilar. This game really is focused on a long-term campaign, whether it's hex crawl, dungeon crawl, city crawl, whatever you want to call it, it's a crawl, or with the eventual idea of your players becoming lords and ladies and wizards and high priests and things like that, and establishing strongholds and that type of thing. It's really designed as a long-term play game. Did that answer the question, Mike?
Sort of. Well, I was more getting into, what aspects of white box went into the game, and what or more just stuff.
So the aspects of white box that went into the game are really streamlined mechanics, the spells, and boy, I'll tell you, when you read those spells, you realize that a sleep spell is like a fireball. It's not targeted at your opponents, so be careful where you cast it. You realize the produce fire spell that the druids can throw is also affects everyone within 200 feet any direction except druid. So if you cast it when you're in combat with a bunch of monsters and you're standing next to all your party, you're going to fry everybody. And so the idea of white box being I guess a dangerous game, particularly for things like big spells, is definitely all in there. The concept of hex crawling, if you look at the old Judges Guild rules, or you look at the original D&D rules about moving around the wilderness, that kind of thing, that's all certainly in there. And then the stuff I added was all my house rules out of the 50 different generic supplements that I got that were not called Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s, to kind of make the game flow better. And the rules, some of those rules were invented by me. Some of those rules were alternate, were taken with somebody else's rule that sort of didn't work, that I sort of made work for me. We had to create our own back in the day.
Right. Oh yeah. Well, so give me your. So I'll ask you two questions. Give me your favorite. What's your favorite house rule you use that you pat yourself on your back going, man, that was a really good idea. I'm glad I had that idea. And then what rule in D&D do you just absolutely hate that everybody uses? You're just like, I will not use that.
An easy to answer to those. I love the lore check rule. I love the lore rules. I think they keep everybody engaged, so everybody always has something to do, right? So like when you're running a game with 20 people, trying to keep the kind of the wallflower over there playing the wizard or whatever is sometimes tough. But if there's a lore check that comes up with a wizard, and you have the wizards and the bards roll, and the wizard makes it, he's the guy you tell exactly what the situation is, right? And so it gives the whole group a sort of I love the lore checks. I think I did a good job with those. I think Edwin made them so that humans understand them, and I'm really happy with those. The rule I absolutely hate for everything after white box or everything after Greyhawk is I roll and disarm the trap, or I roll and open the secret door. So the concept of this is, it's cool with me if a thief identifies a trap, right? Because the cleric can do that too, and kind of the fighter even could, or the dwarf if they're looking for it. Mm-hmm. But then it's like, okay, there are 3 wires, a red one, a green one, and a blue one. What do you do? And so, maybe if it's a thief and he makes a check, I'll say, well, the red wire looks like it could be a little looser than the green and the blue wire. but the blue and the green wire both connect in at the thing. And so they have to decide based on your kind of social interaction and discussion how they're going to disarm that trap. It's not just a dice roll. And I hate the fact that you create this wonderful trap that's, you know, really tricky and and is disarmed by doing X. And then the thief goes, oh, I rolled a 22%. I disarm it. As opposed to saying, I'm doing this. Secret doors, same way. The elf can detect the secret door, and that's awesome. There are 3 buttons, right? A right button, a middle button, and a left button. Or there's, and actually one of the things I wrote into one of the modules that's going to be coming out is there's these spinny things that show the phases of the moon, and they found some clues along the way that talk about moon runes or whatever. And they have to put the pieces of the puzzle together to realize they need to do a certain sequence or whatever to open the door. And so having them actually puzzle through and think through how they're going to take actions that are really kind of just bypassed in a lot of game systems. I hate the fact that you could just, I opened the secret door. Okay. I disarmed the trap. Okay.
Well, that's a huge criticism of 5e, because 5e, they take away you actually interacting with the DM because you make like a speech check or whatever. Because I'll make my characters, okay, you come to the tavern, what are you going to do? Well, we want to find out about this, that. Okay, I want to role play that out. I want to maybe the bartender, this, that. 5e players just go, what's my role? What do I roll? Like, what do you mean? Well, if I roll and I hit my number, then you have to tell me. Like, no, we don't do it that way. You need to talk. You got to really talk to me.
And I provide a pretty deep discussion on that in the Game Master's Guide. Actually, you may have even seen that, but it's called When to Roll Dice and When Not to Roll Dice. And I actually got a couple of pages in there about, you know, if the guy tries to leap the 100-foot chasm, you don't need to roll dice. He just falls 200 feet and dies. If the guy wants to step over the sleeping dog, he just does it. Unless he has like a 5 dexterity, in which case you might give him a 1 in 6 chance of failing, you know, something like that. But like a good example of that with exactly what you said about gathering information in a tavern, Mike, is I would certainly give a bard or somebody with a higher charisma or a thief, depending on the situation, a higher chance to find the right guy to talk to, right? But then they got to talk to the guy. So they can identify. So lore checks and thievery checks and things like that will let you identify things. They won't solve the problem. And I what you just said was spot on with the, you know, I make a dice roll and I make a charisma check and I seduce the dragon. Well, no, you don't. You know,
I want to know what happens.
That's just, those are the worst.
Oh, I did.
Those are the worst DMs, right? Because not everything should be possible. You may think it's possible, but you are wrong. And there has to be some grounding. You know, again, if you're in my campaign, you have to understand there's a certain amount of bullshit I'm willing to accept, but there's certain bullshit I'm unwilling to accept. Right. And that's the kind of thing where just, I'm sorry, you're out. Adult swim, kids get out of the pool.
And
well, so some of the campaign I'm playing right now, some of my like that we did this weekend, I love the parlay stuff when you have to talk to somebody that they ran into this guy that's crazy. He's a crazy guy but he knew the way into the inner sanctum of the evil wizards that are running everything. So they had to, so this guy's crazy. And he's got Stockholm syndrome because he's been held prisoner for, you know, dozens of years. They had to figure out how do we talk to him and make him want to lead us in there. And it was great. It took like, you know, 15, 20 minutes. They had to talk it out. And I made them suffer, and they were sweating it out because they really didn't know what this guy, but they eventually found out what this guy wanted by interaction. We were interacting that, okay, this is what this guy's into. Okay, here's what we're going to do. And you're going to like this because we're going to do this. That you miss all that stuff when you just decide you're just going to make a die roll and it's done. And I really think that's a huge part of the game. That's the whole point. We play around the table.
Well, that's where I go back to what I said, that because my real focus is on an ROLE role-playing game. And so it can't be all about rolling dice, or honestly, we should be playing Flames of War, right? I mean,
why don't you just play Yahtzee and yell at each other?
I mean, I love rules. I'm an avid tabletop miniatures guy, right? And I play a whole lot of World War II miniatures, and that's all rules. But that's not a role-playing game; it's an ROLE playing game. That's a tactical war game. And you know, and more power to people. If they want to play, I don't really care what people like playing. If they like playing it, play it. But I like the social interaction, and I think it makes it a lot more fun to DM it. I can tell you that when you're interacting with the players and having them figure stuff out. One of my proudest moments of the recent history was I've got one guy that's one of my regular players at conventions. He's a close friend, and he's sort of a murder hobo, right? I don't even know. He might even be online right now. I'm not gonna say who it was, but he actually he'll check with me before signing up for my games. He's like, "Hey man, are we gonna fight a bunch of shit tonight, or is it gonna be another Mensa test?" and some adventures I write are gonna be, Shadow of the Blood Moon, which is the one in the expansion pack. I think there's 3 fights in like a 28 page or whatever adventure. And it'll be bigger than that because it's smaller paper size. But there's 3 fights. Now, one of them is the big boss fight with the big boss monster at the end. But there's only a couple other fights. I think there's only 2. There's only 1 plus the boss that aren't avoidable. But it's a mystery solving, puzzle solving, riddle solving, information gathering adventure with about 40 keyed areas. You'd almost think it's a Cthulhu adventure, for God's sakes. Sort of is. But
we don't hold that against you. We don't.
Yeah, I know. But that was intentional. And the thing is though, you've got a month to figure it out because the blood moon's coming, and everybody knows something terrible is going to happen when the blood moon comes. And so that's the other thing I like doing is kind of creating a tension or a time. I like to create a ticking time bomb with players. And I
got to give them expediency. If you give them expediency,
I talk about some ways to do that in the Dungeon Master's Guide as well too. But and most of my Mensa tests aren't really that hard. I play my audience with it. I mean, you guys have seen a few games. I know that Mike and Eric have seen a few games where I've thrown pretty rough shit at people, but I had Pat Ludwig and Johnny. And I got people in the room that if it's too easy, they're gonna just school me. They're just gonna solve it right now, and it'll be too easy.
You gotta make them cry.
So, yeah, so you gotta play that.
Well, one of my favorite games by you, my brother played in, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but I think I want to say it was a Medusa they had to fight. And the first group goes in, and the Medusa wipes them all out. They're all gone, dead, TPK. They roll up characters like, we're going to get that Medusa. They go back in, wipe out, TPK, everybody gone. Was it a Medusa? I think it was a Medusa. Everybody's feeling their saves, their stashes. Yeah. Third time, we're going to go back in. And he was just like, then we just like, we're about to go in and go, no, forget it.
Yeah, we don't want to roll. Well, Shane's got
no, we're not going to roll
his third paladin in a row, which was Lord Ivanalev.
Nice.
I killed him 3 times at one convention. Well, I didn't kill him. I turned him into stone twice and killed him once. But yeah, Sir Ivanalev, he's a Frady Cat paladin. He's still got the character. He'll play with me in Dallas, I'm sure, when I'm at North Texas. Yeah, Shane Noble, that was funny. But yeah, he's kept rolling paladins. But yeah, I think that, again, the key thing, Mike, to what you were saying, just to kind of close on that, unless you have more questions on it, but is the social interaction piece is huge, and that makes it a role-playing game.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely, yes. Yeah, you can just sit there and roll dice all day, but then that's the one thing I think that when we go on and on about modern gamers, and I talk a lot about how at North Texas we get 5e players and we get old school players, and they kind of mix. And I think that's the one thing that 5e players really get interested in when they start playing old school games, is that what you do does matter. You're not just rolling dice. You can change a scenario by how you talk. I mean, if you're sitting there and there's Orc Guard and you have to bluff your way past him, you can't just roll a dice to do it. You have to rely on your own brain. It doesn't matter if you have a 3 strength or an 18 strength. That doesn't matter at that point. What matters is what's going on right here in your head.
To go back to one of your earlier questions, that's one place that I don't like having a lot of luck associated with character generation. And that's the most an 18 strength is +1 to hit and +1 damage, and a 3 strength is -1/-1. The end. And it's 13 or higher or 7 or less. And that way you can get a little bit of an advantage, but you're not running around +3, +6 while the other poor schlub has 0/0. Even though he's only, 2 points lower than you or whatever on your strength roll. So I tried to kind of balance that out with stats don't matter as much. Play and intelligent play matters way more than stats. Stats have an effect, but not much.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the way it should be. I agree, because I've look, some of the best characters that I remember over the years are the ones that had really average stats, yet they accomplished quite a bit.
Highest level character
Because
to ever play.
Not everybody rolls
Highest
an
level
18
player
and
to
99
ever play in
strength
my
or whatever,
game
so,
had nothing above an 8 except his wisdom, which was 17, and he ended up being the highest level player in the history of my campaign. Yeah,
he was smart enough to avoid all the problems.
Guy was just
Nobody
a
else
damn
ran
good
into
player, man. So the other thing I wanted to mention on the kind of the comparisons, yes, differences and similarities to White Box. One of the other things, though, when I finally did get that player's handbook in the late 70s, that I really liked was more classes. And so one of the things I've done in this is it's not just fighters, clerics, and magic users, right? I came up with my own kind of concept of bards, druids, rangers, paladins, that kind of thing. Elves as and of course, races class in my games. Elves and dwarves and hobbits or halflings. And then at a number of people's requests from my Patreon and from playtesters, the expansion pack does add illusionists. Everybody insisted I do a necromancer, so we did that. And they're not in the core book itself, but they're in the expansion pack, which is why everybody's buying the all-in thing, I think. I did, and then somebody really, more than one, really wanted me to do goblins and lizardmen. And so I did those. And what am I forgetting? Oh, barbarian. So the expansion pack's got 6 additional classes. Right now there are 11 in the book. And there's 6 additionals in the expansion pack. And I think that, the 11 in the book for me were enough, but I got a whole lot of requests from a whole lot of people. And I got dogpiled on about the goblin and the lizard man. So I said, sure, why not? And so,
how many? So do you have?
Oh yeah, well
therein
lies the interesting thing. I know Eric put up the links to the Kickstarter and to my Patreon. My Patreon
on the bottom.
My Patreon is free to join. Of course, I like it if you pay me on my Patreon, but I don't get out of bed every morning and write because people pay me on it. I make it like $300 a month. It makes me get out of bed and write every day. I've been very prolific. There are 2 adventures in the box set itself, one in the box set and one in the expansion pack. And then I wrote a short one that I also put in as a stretch goal, I think, like maybe even the next stretch goal. I don't remember what it is. It's coming up pretty quick. And I'm cranking stuff out about the rate of 1 every 2 weeks right now for my Patreon. You have to pay money to get the adventures off the Patreon, but I do put a lot of free material on there, or I run stuff by people, or I throw up encounters and short stuff up there all the time, and it's free. You can join my Patreon for free. I think you have to pay $5 a month or whatever to get the adventures. And if you want to, and then I'm going to do a limited edition book at the end of the year for people who pay more. But there's maybe a dozen of those or 15 of them or something. So highly collectible for a GaryCon auction, Jen. I'll give you guys one. Because there's only going to be like 20 of those things. I mean, it's not going to be very many, and I'm not overprinting them. I'm going to make 3 for me, 1 for each of my kids, and probably a couple for charity auctions, and that's it. And then the dozen or so people on my Patreon, I think it's $15 a month. They get the book. So I'm writing the hell out of this, and I'm planning on continuing to do that. Some of you who know me really well know that occasionally I get sequestered by the military and have to go on some big, large project for a while. Caveat that there's 1 more of those in my future, maybe, if a specific contractor that I'm on the team of wins. But that's like a 4-month job, and I'm not going to say anything more about it because I'm not supposed to. But occasionally I do get ganked back out of retirement. That happened to me a couple of years ago, and I missed the whole convention season and everything else on an emergency deal. But barring that, I'm popping out. Geez, I haven't been this prolific, Mike, I don't think, in my life. I've been knocking a couple thousand words out almost every day.
So I mean, I could tell you've been ever since we started talking about this a couple of years ago. You're very excited about it, and I like to see that, because it was like during COVID, everything just kind of went whoa, and it was just the biggest downer. And this has gotten you back in the groove, man. I can tell you're back.
And I'll tell you, man, that like I said, the part of the fun of this has been playtesting, because it's not every day you get up every Sunday and get the crap kicked out of your rules by Zeb Cook and Jillian Webb. and Johnny Webb for that matter. Because Zeb's in my home game and we play every 2 weeks, and we live. That's actually kind of a funny story because I got a request to join the Miniatures Gaming Club for Pacific Northwest Gamers Club, right? When I was at GaryCon from a David Cook. And I was like, okay, man, what the hell? So I called Zeb on my cell phone. I'm like, dude, is this you? And why do you want to join a game club in Tacoma? Right? Oh, he goes, Helen and I just bought this house in this little town up on the Atlantic Peninsula called Paulsbo. And I said, you mean the teeming metropolis of 8,000 people where I live? And he said, Paulsbo? So he moved in about 2 miles from me. We hang out at the bar together, and and Helen and Zeb come over for holidays every now and then. And because he and I have always been pretty good friends, but it was always, he lived in Baltimore and I lived in Seattle as far as he knew, because nobody's ever heard of the town I live in. Except for Zeb, who moved here, which I just found hilarious. But anyway, so he's worked with me really hard on particular character class balance. Early on, we figured out the fighter was too good, and that the elf and the dwarf and the paladin sucked, and so we modified the three of them. Because one of the things that I put in is I hated the fact that the thief was 7th level and the wizard was 4th level, and so we tried to make all the classes balanced enough, with enough of their own abilities and skills and things, that they all get the same experience points to go up in level. And that took some doing. And that was playtest years 1 and 1.5 probably before we got there, of playing 100 times at different levels. I mean, it was really tough. But we did. And that's where, my kid, who's probably as good at manipulating rules to be a power gamer as anyone ever born, made a big difference. And by the way, by that I mean my daughter, not my son. My son's way more about role playing. My daughter's all about how do I beat dad. Between the three of them, though, I think we did a really good job on balancing it. We made my daughter in particular helped with the parlay rules to make my gibberish that I just sort of knew out of the top of my brain from doing it for 40 years into something that was understandable. And I really got to give. By the way, if anybody is interested to see how this stuff plays, meaning the lore checks, the parlay checks, the morale checks, and the effects that the parlay can have on an encounter, on the Kickstarter, there's a free download PDF of a illustration of how the rules work in play. It's about 3 or 4 pages long.
It's really good. I've read that.
And by the way, that's from an actual game session. That whole thing's from an actual game session. Mm-hmm. And that entire write-up took about 45 minutes of play. So when you put that in perspective, the entire write-up of the 4 pages, and it also kind of explains how the experience points work, which is...
He does a good job, explaining it. I was going to say that.
But that was basically a third of a game session in my home campaign. And I just took notes on it while we were doing it. Actually, Jillian took notes on it, and then I wrote it up into text. So it involves, they counted these wolves. Well, the bard had to speak with animals, he talked to them, and they critically succeed. And then, I had to, on the fly, come up with, well, okay, they're trying to find this witch, right? And so the wolves, well, we know her, she's really nice. She feeds us. We'll take you there, but there's this bad thing in a cave. So if you'll help us kill this bad thing in a cave, we'll show you where the witch is. We know a shortcut to get there, and we know where she is. And so that you go through the process with this, and it was brilliant the way it played out. Where the wolves, because the wolves, they encounter the hill giant, right? And the wolves are like, screw that, and they miss the morale check, and they all run away. So the party's stuck fighting this hill giant. So they fight the hill giant and they kill it, and they actually came up with some really creative ways. They dropped a bunch of rocks on the thing's head from the top of the cave because the dwarf examined above the cave to see if he could create an avalanche of rocks and stuff. And it was really neat. But that was an actual game session play with 4th level characters, I think, from my home game. And it was at least Zeb, Johnny, and Jillian, and I think it was a couple of folks off the Nimitz. I got a lot of folks from the Navy who play in my games because we're a Navy town, right? Actually, half of them are gone right now. The other half are here, which is they trade shifts with me when they go out are deployed. So I get the group back when the other group deploys type thing. It's pretty cool. But I think if you read that, it'll sort of illustrate how that stuff works. And keeping in mind that entire interaction took 45 minutes. And that's sure, I'm a little faster than somebody learning the rules and is new at it will be, but it's so simple that as soon as you sort of get it, it's going to go that quick. And I think the beautiful thing is the OD&D box set said you needed 1 to 2 DMs and 10 to 50 players or something, right? And I'm not sure I can handle 50. I know Tracy does, and I think one other person used to do that too. I don't remember who it was, but I used to be pretty good up to about 30, and now I pretty much cut myself off at 20 because I'm getting old.
It's hard to find a room to stick 30 people in to play a game. I mean, you've done it at North Texas.
I've done it at Gary
North
Con,
Texas.
I even did it at Gen Con one year. But I had 32 at Gen Con, which was an interesting experience. Because it was nobody knew how to play OD&D in my Gen Con group. It was all like 3.5 and Pathfinder players, which was educational on my part. And they loved the game, and we had a blast. We played for 6 hours. But it was challenging explaining to people that they did not need to make a search check or a spot check or a I don't even know what the other one they kept asking me about. Anyway, it was fun. I just made them all naked in the cave and made them figure out a way to survive and get out.
Oh, so an Ed Greenwood game.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Where did that come from?
It came from reality displays.
Maybe we should go to questions, Mike, unless you or Jim or Eric has any specific questions. I know that.
No, if anybody has any specific questions, go ahead and throw them at Bill.
So we have the elk. What's the elk asking me? Family of Wizards with Ages. That's a long-term campaign. That's a great. I've done that before too. And I've had a number of characters who have retired and played acolytes from their priest, or played wizards from their wizards, or played the fourth earl of something or other that was their fighter when their fighter retired. And if you're at North Texas and I'm under 20 players, which I think they usually only allow, you guys only sell like 10 tickets or something, right? I easily go up to 20. What other questions we got? So somebody else hates varying XP. Yeah, I hate them too.
So, are you running? You're running
Necromancer Games in North Texas. I think I've got 2 game sessions. I'll probably force it's just going to be me and Johnny, because Jillian's got stuff. And Paul Pumick, you're always allowed to join my games, dude. Hell, you cross advertise for me and vice versa. So it's you don't even have to ask, just show up. I think it's just going to be John's going to drive from Indiana and come straight to Dallas. So I'm going to buy a one-way ticket and fly out there, and then he and I are going to drive home together. So Krista's got a bluegrass thing, so she's not going to make it. And Jillian's, I can't remember why Jillian couldn't make it, but there's a reason, and she's kind of pissed off because she really wanted to come, but it just didn't work out. I think she may still try and get out of it and fly down with me, and then drive back with John and I, because he's going to have his car. So there will be 2 of my games and 1 or 2 of John's games. My games are always at night, and they're never Saturday night because you can't miss the auction. And John usually runs during the day. Anybody who's played with me and thinks I'm even a reasonably half decent DM should play with my son, because he's way better than I am. And Steve ran his first convention game for adults when he was 8. And
I can see that.
Yeah, my kids didn't. I mean, he started playing when as soon as he could talk, right? So by the time he was 4, he was playing D&D. But so he's been playing for 16 years, and he's only 20. Yeah, our whole family, except for me anymore, because of my claws that are formerly football players' hands, can't pick anymore. But my entire family are very talented musicians, and their baseline's bluegrass. My wife's in a 70s rock band, and then Sarah, man, I tell you guys got to get out there. But you of course have the lifetime in at Gary Con with me. You already know that. Sarah and her husband, drove me home and drove me back to the airport and all that other stuff after Gary Con. I stayed with them for a night, and they've got children. And I got their little girl working on my 2D10 thing to teach her multiplication tables before she's in elementary school. I'll explain it to anybody anytime they want in person. I had my kids doing multiplication tables by the time they were 3. Let's see.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch your kids grow up at the con
Well,
because you used to bring them every year. They were little. They were little kids.
So Jillian was 6 her first convention and just turned 6, and John was 4 when he was at his first convention. And because I went 1 year with Jillian without John, and then the next year she was 7 and he was 4. So, they're avid gamers, and they freaking love it, man. And like I said, Jillian never misses a Sunday. She actually had to arrange with her boss. She doesn't bartend Sunday before 5 p.m. so she can play in the D&D game. Which is, I'm the only thing that rates a I won't work in these hours thing. Is my D&D game.
My dad's DMing. You gotta let me go.
The brewer at the brewery plays in my game too. He's the dwarf, which is so appropriate. He looks like a dwarf. He's even got the curly mustache and everything else. So anybody else have anything else they want to ask me? Please get on there and pledge. We want to hit more stretch goals. Join the Patreon. It's free if you want it to be. If you want to pay something, you get more stuff, but you get plenty of stuff if it's free. I think I really have developed a game here that is a little different than what everybody else has done. I think that probably 2/3 of this game is transportable to other games. So even if you decide you want to keep playing, I don't know, Barrow Maze, there's still a lot in it for you here. I think there's even a lot in it for 5e players. I think there's probably less of it in there for Pathfinder and 3.0 and 3.5 players. There might really not be much in there for 4th edition players, but I did the best I could on it. And I think everybody who sees the encounter section of this thing is going to really be happy with what they see. And I think I did a lot of it. There's a lot of new material in here. It's not one of the things I was really cognizant about is not just putting a new stamp on the same thing that's been published 20 times. And so this isn't like the 5th edition of something else or the 3rd edition of something else. It's really designed as a permanent one printing game that I will be producing a lot more material to support. And whether depending on how many of these things we sell, that'll either be on my Patreon or on Kickstarter for additional material. I don't know. I mean, if we sell 500 units of it, I may just keep it on my Patreon. If we sell 700 units, I don't even know what the number is, right? If there's a demand, I'll produce material for it. I've even got Edwin running this, Mike.
What?
Edwin's running this game now.
Okay.
5e.
I'm about to say Edwin is a 5e maniac. I mean, that's all I ever heard.
I have Edwin running it, and I got the 5e players running it. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think 5e, not with the training wheels on, isn't that dissimilar a game? And believe me, I play tested a lot of 5e with like Steve Winter and those guys, right? And we absolutely broke it. We killed Baba Yaga at 6th level. We killed Strahd at 8th level, right? And so Skeeter's going to be making Skeeter Green's going to be doing games in this, and Edwin's also running games at North Texas. He runs it a little more strictly than I do by the rules, if you will, but there's that. I would expect no less. And so unless anybody's got anything else, I'm gonna go take my my wife and mother-in-law to the bar with the dog and my daughter because she's doing open mic tonight. I want to go watch her sing.
Oh, damn!
Nice.
I want to go to that bar now. Boy, that sounds like a hell.
Yeah, it's
like
a half mile from the house. The owner is a dear friend of ours. Krista bartends there every now and then whenever they need a bartender because there's a wedding or something, because they're all in their 20s and 30s, right? They're all getting married and shit. Jillian's one of the bartenders while she's in nursing school. She's about to quit because she's going to be a nurse, right? And in about a year and a half. And then her clone is another. They're all. I tease her that she's going to get a lawsuit because she only hires young, pretty women as bartenders, and they're all blonde. We killed Strahd at 6th and 5th edition because I was playing a bard, and let's see, John Ratlip was playing a cleric, and Jeff Grubb was playing the Paladin, and he had the Sun Sword. And so Jeff had too many hit points for Strahd to kill in one blow. He had like 60 hit points, and to kill somebody outright, you have to put him to negative 60, right? And so the wizard cast, I somehow I had non-detection and invisibility on me. And then I just kept casting Healing Word every round because it's like it was a duration spell. So every round, all my party heals 1d6 each, right? It wasn't Healing Word. It was like Mass Healing Word or some circle of healing or something. And it was a 3rd level spell, I think. And so Jeff would get knocked down to 0 and fail a death save or whatever. And then he'd pop back up to 3 hit points. And then you'd smack Strahd with a sword. And then he'd get knocked down to 0 and make it have to eat. But you get 3 of those death saves so that he could never kill the Paladin. And I just made sure I always delayed my action until after Strahd went. And then Jeff would pop up and smack the vampire and then go down again and jump up and smack the vampire and go down again. And so nothing could kill us. And so
Ivy, you gotta love it.
so it was absolutely disgusting. Yeah, Daryl, if you ever get a chance, look up John Webb Bluegrass or Krista Webb Bluegrass. John's pretty well known. We actually have a bluegrass festival at our house every August where we have several hundred people show up at my farm and we play music all weekend. But my son's crazy talented, and my wife gets paid to play. I mean, she plays in a band.
You have a very musically inclined family. John is amazing because he can pretty much just pick up an instrument and start playing it, which is that's insane.
So Mike, the other night we were there at the open mic, and John was home from spring break and stuff, and his girlfriend was with him, who, by the way, you're going to get to meet at some point. She's lovely, just wonderful. I couldn't pick a better girl to be with my son. But John there's a guitar in the bar, and his girlfriend kept making him listen to songs to figure out. Harmony Wombats is my wife's band. Kept making him listen to songs like, I don't know, shit with like complicated shit, right? And then our whole family, after the open mic was over, sang probably 15 songs where John had listened to it, start playing it. It sounded like the recording because he's an ear musician. He's incredibly talented. Krista playing bass, Jillian and me, and Krista singing because John still doesn't sing. They put a light on us and like people hung out till like 3 hours after they closed. It was fun as hell. And there were even other musicians that were popping in and playing a little bit. But it was really fun. And Zach teases us about being the Von Trapps. And I'm the only one. I'm the only one who's a marginal talent in that group. The 3 of them are really special, and they're really good. But particularly the boy, though the girl sounds like Stevie Nicks, and she stops a bar when she sings. But one year I made John bring a ukulele, and he was playing a bard character at my games in Texas, and I'd only give him his bard bonus if he sang in the game. Yeah, I know. Big fugly. That's my son.
Yes, he can play the ukulele too. That's crazy.
12-string.
Yeah, he plays the piano.
He plays guitar and fiddle fluently. He can play a mandolin. He can play a banjo. His very first day of playing a banjo was at a bluegrass festival, and he ended up doing 3 solos with a group on stage in front of like 800 people, and he was like 12 years old, and he never
those people drive me crazy. I
actually have that. I have all that on video. He doesn't let me show it to most people because he was still little and fat then. But but now he's 6'3" and not fat. So
John's he's a really good kid. He's a great kid.
Anyway, so it sounds like you guys want to talk about the Lion's Diamond thing, right?
Yes, we do want to talk about it. So we're gonna. All right. Well, support Jim. Support Bill's. I keep calling Bill Jim. Support Bill's Kickstarter. We have the. Can we throw that up there real quick again, Eric? And it's by the way, it's already funded, and Bill has pretty much guaranteed it's going to come out.
I mean, you never know if nuclear war happens or something, but past that.
No, I expect it. If nuclear war happens, I don't care. I expect this.
And we're willing to stretch goals. I'm really hoping we get to that $60,000 number because I want Steve Chenault to write a module.
Oh, nice.
And I've written like 3 or 4 for him, but I have never asked him to do it before, and he promised me he would. So make the Troll Lord write a module for us.
Folks, link on the bottom of the screen, tenkars-tavern.game/necro. And the Patreon is at patreon.com/thefrogpond795.
Yeah, and the Patreon's absolutely free unless you want to pay some. So there's that. All right, guys, I'm going to sign off. Thank you very much for doing the interview, and Eric. And
Yeah, great to see you, man.
And,
we will see you in June.
I'm happy to be on the show anytime you want me to. So just let me know. Not even about Kickstarters and stuff. I'll just be on to shoot the shit with you. But I appreciate what you guys do. Thanks so much.
Have
a good evening.
No problem, man.
All right. I am summoning our unofficial attorney. We shall
who has actually read the case in point, which Eric and I we read over it, but we did not get into the depth that
it's a delightful read. It really is. Oh
my goodness gracious. So the quick and dirty of it is, as anybody, as well, some people might know, Diamond Distribution has had some issues, and they are basically going out of business. They're going to do a chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is a redistribution.
Well, yeah, it's a bizarre one because
it's weird, yeah, because they're going to do a chapter 7, then do an 11 or 11 instead. I can't remember. Anyway, they were to sell to Alliance Distributing their company for $85 million.
Was it that much?
I think it was $85 million. But when Alliance put the bid in, WotC was part of the deal. Now, why WotC is important is because Magic cards, Pokemon, D&D to a lesser extent, but they have properties that you would like to distribute, especially Magic. Magic's probably the number one thing on there. So Alliance is like, sure, as long as WotC is part of it, we're in. This is great. However, it turns out that supposedly undisclosed to Alliance, WotC's contract with Diamond ended the last day of April. That's today. And they will not have WotC products to distribute. So Alliance, being understandably upset, wants a take back on this, except that Diamond says, we're going to keep your $8 million deposit, though, because auction's an auction. You bid on it, and there
lack
it is.
Of due diligence.
It is a mess, and maybe Ty can explain it a little better, but it's an absolute mess. I don't know. I don't think we ever figured out. Oh, there he is, the man, the legend. Oh, look at it, and he's in his room. He's in
I'm in
your
my
office or in the game
office
room?
at my house.
Okay, he's in you're not. He has a gigantic game room behind that too that we're not going to get to see, but the office is amazing in itself. So welcome, Ty. Can you actually read this, and I've heard this is a rumor that you're actually an attorney that may or may not specialize in this field of
I do a
expertise.
lot of merger and acquisition work. In fact, I'm flying out there tomorrow to go pitch a deal to somebody.
You may explain this better than I have. What exactly? Okay, so we have 3 entities here. We have WotC, we have Alliance, we have.
And actually, let me throw something out real quick. So, this is the background that most people don't understand. So, there used to be small distributors all around the country. There was Greenfield, there was Berkeley North and South, there was Chessex, which originally started and then grew. There was Chessex Midwest, Chessex East, Chessex South. There was the Armory. And just like a lot of industries, about 20 odd years ago, there was a consolidation. And so in one fell swoop, Greenfield went out of business. So did a couple of the other smaller regionals. But Berkeley North and South, Chessex, and the Armory were all purchased and merged into a single game distribution company called Alliance. Alliance was owned by Diamond, which it was a dovetail piece because Diamond, for the longest time, had the sole monopoly on comic distribution in the United States and North America, and so on. Yeah. Now, this got challenged a couple of times. There used to be other competitors that came and went, Capital City and so on. But Diamond was the powerhouse. This was run by a guy named Steve Geppi. Steve Geppi eventually walked away from everything that he had created. He created the Diamond Galleries, which is a high-end auction house for comic books, high-end comic books. This is where you take your first Superman appearance and so on and so forth. There was Diamond Distribution, which was comics and everything that comes through previews. Then there was Alliance, which handled everything as far as game distribution. So there were all these bits and pieces. There was even a very small retail chain in Baltimore at one point. But Alliance has been the game distribution owned by the overall Geppi umbrella for the past 20-odd years. So go ahead, Ty. Sorry, it helps to have some background.
You set the plate.
It also gets a little confusing because the complainant in all this is also named Alliance.
Yes.
So you have Diamond Comic Distributors, Inc., which I'm going to just call Diamond. Yep. They own Alliance Game Distributor, but Alliance Entertainment, Inc., which I'll try to call AEI. It was the top bidder in this case. Yeah, so it's a really weird thing. So Diamond goes into Chapter 11 reorganization for bankruptcy. And that's where you basically say, look, there's actually value here as a going concern. And so we're going to try to reorganize and try to get maximum value for the creditors. What you have to remember about bankruptcy is the bankruptcy estate is solely concerned with the well-being of the creditors, not the owners of the company. Most 11s wind up being converted into 7s, which are liquidation, and we call those Chapter 18s because 11 plus 7 is 18. We're very clever that way. Anyway, but this thing appears to have actually been a decent candidate for an 11 because they wound up with several bids for the assets. They had an auction process. Now, this other group, Universal and Ad Populum, two different companies, but they kind of glommed together. Universal was what they call a stalking horse bidder. They were an initial bidder for the auction that set a low value, like $40 million. And their sole purpose is basically to define a floor. And if someone outbids them, they have to outbid them, plus they get a fee, a couple $1 million, that kind of thing, for being the stalking horse. But in any event, and they can also bid as part of the normal process. So they go through this process of bidding, and they wound up, and the petitions are not entirely consistent. But from what I can tell, the final bid was approximately $72 million and some change. One of the pleadings says 70.88, one says 72.245.
And I'm sorry, Ty, can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
So understand this. When people are bidding on Alliance Game Distribution, what they're bidding on is they are bidding on the assets that are in the Alliance warehouses across the United States. So there is inventory in these warehouses that some of these companies want. What they see is the value. They see taking all of this material and then selling this and recouping, in theory, profit above their cost of purchase. So there's that aspect of it as far as physical inventory. But then there is also they're not tangible assets, but there are essentially the contracts in place that companies have with Diamond. I'm sorry, that companies had with Alliance that could be advantageous. Sorry,
yeah.
Go ahead.
And hence the issue. So anyway, during the process, AEI has the highest bid, and depending on which pleadings you look at, it's either 70.88 million or 72.245 million. The actual price in the purchase agreement is a calculation. So it's this much money less this plus the value of the accounts receivable less payable, blah 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 blah. So and in any event, so even though AEI has the highest bid, the bankruptcy, I guess the debtor in possession, that would be the people running Diamond Comic Distributorship. They want to sell to the second highest bidder, which was also the stalking horse. That's Universal. Well, so AEI files a petition with the court to force Diamond to sell to them because they're the highest bidder, and they win that. Well, a few days later, AEI files a lawsuit in the bankruptcy court saying that they've been defrauded, that Diamond left out key information about a contract with WotC, that WotC told them, we're terminating the agreement, and we're terminating effective April 30th. And they attempted to negotiate to lower the price, and that failed. Also, in the middle of this, AEI had to give $8.5 million of earnest money to put that up. They're now saying,
and by the way,
well,
Diamond
that's
wants
what
to keep
AEI
that,
is
right?
saying.
Diamond
But
doesn't
here's
want
the
to
other little quirk. So this afternoon, the bankruptcy court came in and said, you know what, we're just going to approve the sale to the second highest bidder, which is Universal. And they all had an announcement and a kumbaya, yay, we're glad to be together. So I personally think that pretty well ends this lawsuit, because there's no basis to hang on to AEI's money. AEI can allege damages, but I read the purchase agreement, and the purchase agreement has generalized language that says, sure, you can pull out if there's a material adverse event, but I don't think that supports them claiming any damages. It would support them getting their $8.5 million back. It is a little bit funky. Normally, when you sell a company, the seller always has to warrant and represent certain things. Like, there's nothing terrible that we're aware of. All of our contracts are good, things like that. This contract lacked a lot of those customary provisions because it was a kind of an auction process and a sort of, not exactly caveat emptor, but pretty close. But in any event, Alliance is saying that they played cute, didn't tell them about the termination, that they knew WotC was going to terminate, didn't disclose that, and they even redacted that from the contract that they sent over. Well, maybe that's true. It could be true, but I know that if I were representing a buyer and a supplier that was 25% of our total volume, I'd want every provision of that contract disclosed. And and if I'm looking at the contract, I'm going, there are no termination provisions in what's been given to us. I wonder if the termination provisions are in the redacted part. And gosh, I wonder why they'd want to redact that. So I don't know. Stuff happens. These kind of things do happen in deals. I've had all kinds of crazy things come up at the last minute that you had no idea of. So who knows what really went on, but it looks pretty clear that Diamond's principals didn't really want to sell to Alliance. No,
they didn't, because
and the fact that Alliance's price, best I can tell from the pleadings, I couldn't find the bid documents, but apparently Universal's price, Universal's price was like $2 million less than Alliance's, or $1 million, depending on which version of the document you're looking at. But there wasn't a big difference. And so if Universal is if they go through with the purchase at their bid price, then that tells me that it's likely that what was going to happen at WotC contract was known. Why would you, why would you agree to pay only $2 million less than Diamond if you weren't aware of a contract being terminated that's about 25% of your revenue? So,
what does Alliance say? So Alliance, they're okay with no WotC being part of it. How do they think they're going to make their money back?
Well, Alliance wanted to reduce the purchase price. They were arguing. They say in their pleadings that the Raymond James advisor, that was the investment banker hired to facilitate the sale. They said the Raymond James guy agreed that a $14 million purchase price adjustment would be appropriate. They wanted an 18. It was a range 14 to 18, and then Alliance wanted an 18 to $25 million purchase price adjustment. When you're talking 25% of revenue, either of those adjustments would be appropriate. Mm-hmm. But apparently, from what I've read today, though, Universal is just paying their bid price.
So Universal doesn't care if WotC's part of it or not. That's not they don't.
And that's what I'm saying. It sounds to me like you'll never know. I don't think that Diamond was taken as much by surprise as they say they were. That's just my opinion, and I infer that because Universal would have wanted a similar price adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't, and they didn't balk. They had an announcement, oh yes, we're all glad to be. And I kind of like the idea of the I think the bankruptcy judges had all the fun he can take, because what this does is this dispenses with that claim. It dispenses with the threat to convert this to a Chapter 7, because because Diamond has not filed their financial reports with the court that they're required to do, which is, bankruptcy. I've these days, bankruptcy courts are a lot more stringent than they used to be. The days of I have a dream are kind of over. So I'm really mildly surprised that the court tolerated them not filing their financial reports. I've been involved in a few, and I had a client one time that didn't do what the bankruptcy court said, and I had a very long and uncomfortable conversation with the bankruptcy trustee. And mostly it was me just sitting there going, "Yeah, I understand. Yes, we'll get right to it. Yes, sir. We'll do that." So anyway, but yeah, I had it's a pretty wild case. You don't normally see it quite like this in most deals.
But for one of the few times this year, we can say that Gaming Stupid was not WotC. WotC appears to have no actual hand in what went on here.
No indication that WotC is in any way involved in this or culpable.
WotC did say the reason why they did not renew the contract, and that was known at the end of last year, was that their sales through Diamond distributors and their subsidiaries were down 8%.
Yeah.
Even though their total sales for the company are up, Diamond wasn't hitting the mark, and they said the only reason why they extended it through April 30th was to assist in the bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, normally, now again, this was an auction, and so it was a very abbreviated due diligence process. But normally, when you conduct due diligence, you want to have some kind of interaction or some kind of discussion with the major customers of the business you're acquiring.
They did after they already agreed. They had a phone call with WotC's president and the vice president of whatever marketing or something like that, global marketing, and that's when they tried to do the. Could you maybe please? I got a feeling that the initial buyers were hoping they could convince WotC to stay, and when they couldn't convince them, then it was like, oh well, we were never actually told. Yes, Jim.
Couple of things. Number one, Universal already distributes WotC products in Canada. Universal will, if they take over, will distribute. They're already familiar. They already have an account with WotC.
There you go.
It's just adding. Ty, in looking at all the filings, I was never able to see a list of assets for Diamond Comics. Did you ever see one?
I didn't see that either. There was inventory because part of the purchase price in the purchase agreement had an adjustment for actual inventory.
Right.
There were contract rights. There was net working capital of a very specific number plugged in for working capital of around $6 million. So I do think a premium was being paid for it being a going concern. I don't think it was just raw liquidation value. And I think that's probably why the court jumped in and said, you know what, we're just going to put a stop to this. Because remember, their goal is to maximize what goes to the creditors, but yeah, I did not see a balance sheet or anything like that when I looked at it.
So the Jeppy family's company is the holding company that owns Alliance, that owns Diamond Comics, that owns the Diamond International Galleries, and so on. And one of those things that used to be a linchpin for Diamond Comics was that they had literally a Raiders of the Lost Ark warehouse on the west side of Baltimore, where it was organized by year, and everything that had ever appeared in previews, there were 2 samples in the collected areas. It was organized by year and then month. And so if there were 568 items that were in previews in January of 1993, there were 2 of each of those 568 items that were in the archive file. And so that archive went back more than, 40 years at this point. And so it'll be very interesting to see if that's actually an asset that's part of Diamond, because that would have also included Magic alphas, betas, everything, and so on and so forth. Along with that, all Games Workshop releases, and so on and so forth. But if the Jeppy family has kept that out of the Diamond inventory, because what you used to do as a Diamond employee at a store is you got to go to the archive, rate it, bring things back in the store, and sell them. And if it's not listed as an asset, I mean, that would, I wouldn't be surprised, because the Jeppy family could just simply hold on to that and sell that off on their own.
It's not unheard of in these deals for inventory to evaporate. But when you got a bankruptcy court involved, I'd be very circumspect about doing that, because.
Well, I think it would have happened before this.
Yeah. And when you file for bankruptcy, of course, any transfers of assets within a year of the filing to insiders can be undone. But that's if they're disclosed or if the court otherwise finds out about them.
Have you seen any notations about operating costs for their IT side, their software side?
No, there was nothing in the petitions and the legal documents I saw. There was very little financial information, and like I said, what there was strangely inconsistent. As I said,
yes.
And within the same document, I had a final bid of $72.245 million and a $70.088 million, or $70.88 million.
I'm hearing Maryland filings when you say this.
Yeah, and then of course then supposedly during the post bid being accepted negotiations, the 70-something million number went up to 85.84, but they didn't give any. And I don't know if that was through the mathematics of the price calculation. As I said, the price was expressed as a formula. A lot of times what you'll do is you'll just put placeholders in there until you have the actual numbers. So I don't know. It was, like I said, what struck me as what got my interest this afternoon was when the bankruptcy court just said, you know what, we're going to take the second best bid. We're done.
Well,
like, okay.
Universal is solid. They're an established company, I think, And I'm sorry. So it's Universal that's one, or is it no? It's Alliance.
Universal and Ad Populum won together.
Yeah, because Alliance
they bid for different assets.
Sorry, Alliance Entertainment is a predatory warehouser, where what they've tried for years over the last decade is to get game companies to use them as a distributor. The fees stack up for your product, and so they eventually get you underwater and just say, "Give us your product.
Give us your product in exchange for the
and
fee.
We'll wipe out your bill," because there's no shortage of companies in the game industry that have fallen prey to Alliance. They
didn't win this round. If this was my first thought was this could have very well been Alliance attempting to retrade the deal using the WotC contract as an excuse to do that. Well, if they did, it was unwise of them to try that, because when the next bid up is only $2 million less, you should have anticipated the court would go, no, we're not going to let you knock $25 million or $18 million off the purchase price. We'll just sell to the second party.
Right.
And the fact that they snapped it up, the fact that the second bidder didn't go, oh hell no, we're out too because of this WotC contract, that tells me the second bidder was fully aware of the WotC contract and not bothered by it.
No,
so
because what they'll do, Universal will now own a Canadian company will now own a game distribution, the major game distribution business in the United States. They've already got the warehousing. They've already got an idea of how to operate the trade. This isn't like it's Alliance where they're not an active wholesaler for games. It makes perfect sense. And this gives Universal a chance to get lines into Canada that it hasn't been able to get through normal channels.
Now, what is WotC? Who is distributing WotC's product now? Since the Diamond implosion or explosion or whatever,
but,
who is doing their distribution?
So WotC is distributed through the traditional wholesalers. So Alliance / the firm in Wisconsin, all the distribution channels you can imagine. They eliminated their direct trade, so stores can't go direct with WotC the way they used to. If Alliance had completely disintegrated into Chapter 7, WotC very well may be compelled to think about going back to direct terms. But they put in, what was it, roughly about 10, 15 years ago, they put in an entire level of distribution, or they got rid of direct to push everything to distribution to get out of warehousing, sales, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't want to do it.
Who is Ad Populum? They're a division of WizKids, is that right?
Yeah.
Because they got the comic piece, and Universal got the game piece.
Yes.
Best I can tell.
Yeah, because now, I mean, once you separate these two businesses, and they were always separate businesses, but there has already been a gigantic explosion within the comic distribution side because Marvel finally, Marvel did a half-ass attempt in 1993, and it backfired.
It was a failure, miserable failure.
It was a dismal failure. And then Marvel's now gone to Random House, and that has been slowly worked out and seems to be going okay. There's a couple of other comic book distributors competition at that level.
Who does DC now? DC is also
they're a separate
third party.
entity. Yeah, so
the
two majors went different directions from Diamond, which is one of the reasons Diamond is having all the financial difficulty. And so all the independents are through Diamond. And then the other thing was that Diamond brought Previews. Previews hasn't been printed in a few months. I think it's been out of business. I think it's not been printed for a while. But this gives you a chance to take over it lets you take the Dark Horse publishers, it lets you take IDW and so on and so forth, and then wrap that in a shell and go that way. And truthfully, the comic book stores, they've already went from one vendor, Diamond, to three vendors, Marvel, DC, and Diamond. And having another one won't be that difficult, but it gives them a chance to consolidate, because WizKids can wrap everything around their toy lines directly into the Diamond piece, where they've already been doing business with stores as WizKids. So it makes perfect sense.
All right, so DC is using Universal distribution and Lunar.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
It looked like the game distributing portion and the comic book distributing portion were roughly comparable in value.
Yeah,
it looked to me like Ad Populum and Universal bid roughly the same amounts. It's interesting about the $8.5 million. I don't know what basis Diamond comic distributors would have for keeping the $8.5 million, particularly now.
well, that's just them trying to claw it back.
And that wasn't, and see, they call it earnest money in their complaint, but that's not how it was defined in the purchase agreement. Purchase agreement, it was just essentially, I mean, it did some of the same things that earnest money does, but earnest money is usually money that you put up and in certain circumstances can be forfeited depending on the particulars. There was nothing in the purchase agreement that dealt with the forfeit of that money. It was just money to show that they had the financial heft to go forward with the transaction.
Well, and the other thing that's interesting about this, Ty, is that the judge, he wanted to sell it as a going concern, where it probably, truthfully, for Universal would have been much more tactical to break each warehouse out separately, go with the contents of each, treat the businesses. I don't know. I've seen enough mergers and acquisitions that frankly, I'm surprised the bits and bobs weren't sold off separately versus the whole operation.
Yeah, normally, I mean, like I said, most Chapter 11s turn into 7s. That's, and they sort of did that because, Universal didn't want the comic book part. They wanted, so Ad Populum stepped up and took that. So they had kind of a combined bid glommed together, which in the previous complaint that Alliance filed to force the bid to go to them, the sale to go to them because they were the highest bidder, they alleged that was improper under the bid rules. And I skimmed the bid rules. I didn't read them in detail to verify that. The problem with reading a complaint is, of course, you're getting the absolute most skewed version of the facts possible, because you're reading what the plaintiff says, and so I generally, with those, only at best rely on factual representations that are relatively easy to pin down. But a kind of wild and woolly story though. You don't normally. When I have dinner with an investment banker buddy of mine next week, I'm gonna go through this with him, just see what he thinks. Because I mean, there was a lot of shenanigans that went on. They win the bid, but the company tries to sell to somebody else anyway. Then there's this poison pill that pops up with the WotC contract. If I were a betting man, what I think happened was, I think that you're probably right. Alliance Entertainment thought they could salvage the WotC contract, and if they couldn't, they could get a price. They could get a beat down on price. But what bothers me is, okay, if you thought that, why couldn't you anticipate the judge would simply take the second best bid, which is only $2 million less than yours?
As we found out in the last year, there's lawyers that aren't really qualified to. I won't say.
So I think it's two different things, Di. I'm sorry. I think it's two different approaches. I think Alliance approached this as we grab their inventory, we sell their inventory. We already have a distribution business. We don't need Alliance. But Universal sees this as a strategic move. And Universal sees this as one fell swoop taking over the majority of North American gaming distribution. Because Alliance began with Chessex and Armory merging in 1998, and I can't remember how quickly after that they then bought out Berkeley. But when Chessex and Armory, everything west of the Mississippi became Alliance, and then Berkeley, when they added Berkeley, they took over everything else. They had all the majors in one spot.
So go ahead.
No, and just I think Universal sees this as a strategic move, that they wanted an operating concern. They're happy to get the assets, and they'll use the assets. They will literally sell the assets, but they're not going to fire sale it. They're not going to do a leverage buyout the way that Alliance is. Alliance was trying a leverage buyout where they're going to make their money on the inventory. And Universal sees this as taking over business. Sorry, go ahead,
you can infer, looking here at the purchase agreement, you can infer maybe what value they were putting on the going concern piece, as opposed to just the value of the inventory and so forth.
Right.
Scrolling so the purchase price started out as the gaming-based purchase price, which was $36.8 million. Start with that number. 90% of inventory value plus 90% of the inventory value plus this minus that plus the other thing. So I would say looking at this, that about 30 million, maybe 28 million, something like that, some number in that range. That was the valuation for it being a going concern, as opposed to just stuff sitting in warehouses.
And I'm sorry, what was the inventory value roughly?
They didn't have a value. They just said, we're going to add to the purchase price the inventory amount. My guess is they hadn't finalized the inventory valuation by the time they did the auction.
My guess is that frankly, I think, unfortunately for Universal, I think the inventory is going to be, I think it's going to be 20% stuff they'll be able to sell quickly and 80% that's horseshit. I say that because every distributor I've ever been in, all the game distributors were always the same, right? That they had inventory they were too long on, and that they had been sitting on for too long.
I can remember on the book taking inventory in deals that I've been in, where I go into the warehouse and I reach up and is all this inventory sellable? Oh yeah, absolutely. And you reach up and you run your finger along the edge and it's black with dust.
Yeah.
And you go.
The Armory in 1998, the Armory still had Chaosium Ring World companions, as many as you wanted, new and shrink.
I'd want those now. They'd be great.
Now, yeah, but
I mean, tons of this stuff. And
now that's a sellable. I mean, I haven't myself gone in and been part of a physical inventory in about a decade. Right. Last time I was in a Sub-Zero freezer. We were buying a salsa manufacturer, and I'm in the freezer on a Saturday morning, taking inventory. We're not impress the client.
That's
but
right.
but you got to do that. I mean, that inventory. Hopefully, hopefully Universal, and for that matter, Ad Populum too. Hopefully, they've bought, operations before, and they're familiar with how inventory can have the value overstated.
My guess is they'll keep key principles, right? They'll keep
Yeah.
key principles, but Universal's got a plan.
Yeah.
I mean, I've
Well,
heard
they were
nothing.
clearly the ones. They were clearly the ones that Diamond wanted to sell to.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that's pretty ballsy to go. We're just going to take the $2 million less. But you see, that illustrates what I was saying earlier. Though the court doesn't want to hear who you think. When you're in Chapter 11, the debtor in possession is the term you use for the principals who continue to operate the company, and that term goes back up 200 years in the law. But you are in possession of the property, but you are in possession of the property to maintain it and maximize it for the creditors. So the fact that Diamond's principals were saying, look, this is a better deal for the company, it's a better deal for the employees, the court's like, we don't care. You have to take the highest bid because that's what's best for the creditors. And so, it's just weird that, that Alliance basically files suit within the bankruptcy case to force the sale over to them. And then 5 days later, 10 days later, however long it wasn't very long, then file suit again, claiming fraud and all this, which, and they're saying that their $8.5 million wasn't returned. I can't imagine what the argument would be. It's in the hand of an escrow agent. It's not in the hands of Diamond. That 8.5.
Can attorneys possibly sometimes exaggerate things, or is that just
No? Well, I really do think there's no. Well, I don't have to think. I mean, we know from the plaintiff's pleadings, that they attempted to retrade the deal. Now, they felt like they had solid reasons because their argument is we didn't know that the revenue was going to be 25% less than you said it was going to be.
Yeah, but the more you talk and Jim talks, I think that's BS.
Again, you would expect similarly placed buyers to behave similarly, right? So the second highest bidder, you'd expect them to go, oh crap, we want a price adjustment too. Instead, they're singing Kumbaya and saying we're glad to do the deal and yada yada yada. So it looked a little. If you remember when I was messaging you guys this afternoon, when I saw the judge did that, I said, "Oh, wait it," because my first thought was, "Oh God, these guys tried to pull a fast one, got caught."
Well, I thought too. First thing I thought,
yeah, and that does happen, But normally we're a little sharper on the buy or on the buy side to go, wonder when those contracts that we're relying on would terminate.
If I was Universal, I would have sent somebody over the border with a bag of cash, and I would have gone to each of the Diamond warehouses, and I would have said to somebody, I want you to walk with me through the warehouse for 2 hours after the warehouse closes for the day, and I'm going to give you a big wad of cash to shut up and not tell anybody I was here. And I would have gone through every single warehouse, and I would have taken pictures, and I would have done a guesstimate on the inventory down to like within $10. And I would have used that to execute a bid.
Typically, what you do is you plug a placeholder value in. You say, look, the seller says, look, we're carrying the inventory at this price on the books. We think this is a reasonable value for the inventory. And typically in the purchase agreements, it says, it's the purchase price is going to be this plus whatever we agree the value of the inventory is. And sometimes if the agreement is really sophisticated, you'll have some process to work that out, but usually not. I mean, normally the buyer pretty much gets their way. And so what the buyer does is between the time you negotiate the terms of the deal and the time you close the deal, that period in the middle there is the due diligence period. Because this was an auction, of course, it was compressed. But my guess is they have inventory teams in there. But a big red flag would be if your inventory teams go in and they're giving you a value significantly less than what the seller is claiming. You go, hey seller, where'd that inventory go?
So let me warm your heart with a story, Ty. I know somebody who was involved in bidding on assets for a failed agricultural cooperative. Okay, so there's silos, there's distribution, like there's all these different pieces to the puzzle. And the due diligence team, person that I know on the due diligence team, they looked at all the value of every single component, and they knew pretty much to the dollar what it all was actually worth, market value, the whole 9 yards. And when it came to the auction, when it came to the auction where they were going to be bidding against somebody who had expressed publicly that it didn't matter, they were going to swoop in and take everything. All they did was drive them up and up and up on every single piece. The creditors were overjoyed, and the buyer, got paid absolutely top dollar, because as soon as the team, our pro team, got to the point where they knew they were past break even, they just dropped, and then they had forced the new buyer to overpay in some ways, but just pay through the nose for all of it.
You have to wonder. I mean, and that could have happened here. I mean,
Yes.
Universal.
Yes.
Apparently it was a verbal bid process that went over 2 days, and so they're literally going back and forth, probably on the phone, kind of like the NFL draft.
Yep.
Okay, you've got an hour to counter, or I'm going to say bid's done, and because they started out at so the original stalking horse bid was $40 million.
Right.
And the final winning bid was 70 or 72. So, and the stalking horse bid is now also the second highest bid. So it was those two parties. I mean, I never like to see anybody, mess themselves up, unless of course I hate them. And I don't have any bad feelings for Universal and AdPop in one way or the other. But I hope they didn't let that get a hold of them, because a 25% reduction in revenue is a pretty serious deal. Now, an interesting point, Jim, you made the comment that Universal is already handling WotC's business in Canada. Right. Could very well be that Universal is planning on, once the dust settles, they can redo the deal here.
Why would WotC not want to have?
Right.
There's no question of that.
And if these other guys are as predatory as you're saying, and I'm using that lawyer affectation, I'm not questioning it. But,
as we both are.
Yeah.
As we both are.
But if they're as predatory, if Diamond is as predatory as not Diamond, Alliance Entertainment is as predatory as you're saying, I could see WotC just not wanting to do business with them.
Well, I mean, and I know a board game manufacturer that had inventory where all the itemized bill would show up every month, and there was a floor charge and a dusting charge. I mean, it was just a laundry list. And when you give me a bill that looks like a CVS receipt, tell me you're a predatory warehouse without.
Well, I never thought of that. That's when they're sitting there with zillions of dollars of your product being held hostage, basically.
And they make all these wonderful promises about how great they are.
Mm-hmm.
And they sucker in, but most of the RPG companies have now put them aside as a non-starter. You really have to be desperate to go there.
Well, if they're the villains of this story, they outsmarted themselves, because they didn't get they didn't get anything like the deal they wanted, and the litigation, the complaint could very easily have been part of the process to force a retrade of the deal.
Yep.
But I just thought it was interesting.
I think it was a Hail Mary play, and it just didn't pan out.
Yeah, I think the judge is like, you know what? I want this out of my court.
That's right.
Pretty much.
So, all right, we're gonna wrap this up, guys.
All right.
Before Eric's bladder explodes, and
thank you for letting me combine two of my interests.
Yes,
merger and acquisition and gaming.
Well, you made us not. Well, you made us
there would be
avoid to sound like idiots for
I'll throw this out real quick. When the Alliance merger happened and they moved the Armory from its old, when the Armory moved from its old warehouse to its new warehouse, the Armory archive disappeared. It was all the way back to the early 70s of game distribution.
It happens.
All right. Call it a night.
All right, folks. Our patron, of course, is Zach Glazer. You know who he is. Jen, don't even tell him. Don't even tell him his name was on the bottom of the screen. Don't even let him know. But thank you, Zach. Thanks to Bill. Thanks to this random lawyer that we brought in.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the Ty Beard. Thank you.
The
very much.
Ty Beard.
The
Not just any
redoubtable Ty Beard. I
The,
think I'm
the
right.
one and only Ty Beard.
The insurmountable Ty Beard.
And, oh, God, yes. Folks, next live
No,
stream
my wife-
tomorrow
my
night,
wife is
8
watching,
p.m.
so.
I'm sure we'll be talking about WizardCon. Glenn and I on Friday, Rachel and I on Saturday. Live streams. Other than that, folks, thanks to my co-hosts. And as always, be safe, be well, God bless. Roll those dice, roll them well.